The fluorescent lights overhead in the courtroom gave off a harsh, cold light that reflected off Harper Calloway's rigid face as she sat in the defendant's chair. The case against her seemed airtight. Security footage had captured her at the scene of the crime at precisely the critical time. The murder weapon had her fingerprints on it, and a witness testified to seeing her near Brandon Miller's apartment the night he was murdered. The evidence kept stacking up, layer by layer, creating a case with no room for doubt. Harper knew she'd never been in that apartment, but the court wasn't concerned with her side of the story. Inspector Michael Harrington stood on the prosecution's side, his face cold, showing no sign of emotion. He had been the one to oversee the case, frequently telling the press that the evidence against Harper was irrefutable. Everything moved so smoothly, as though it had been orchestrated from the start. Among the spectators, Grayson Hayes, Harper's former colleague, sat stone still, his expression unreadable. But inside, a storm of disbelief raged. He couldn't accept the possibility that Harper was guilty. She had been one of the finest officers he'd ever worked with, a woman who pursued justice with both her intellect and her heart. Then, unexpectedly, a loud bark echoed through the courtroom. All eyes shifted toward Rex, Harper's dog, being escorted out by an officer. But Rex refused to leave. He braced himself, growling fiercely, his paws scraping the floor in resistance. His eyes locked onto Harper, his struggle to remain with her unwavering. Officers had to work together to drag the dog from the room, but he continued to thrash and whine, his gaze never leaving Harper as if trying to hold on. Harper stole a final glance at Rex before being escorted away, a sharp pain flaring in her chest. She wasn't afraid of death. She feared that the truth would never be uncovered. After Harper's conviction, Rex was transferred to another unit. The officers in the new unit quickly realized something was wrong with him. Once a perfectly disciplined dog, Rex now seemed distracted, ignoring commands, refusing to eat, and lying motionless in the corner of his kennel with his eyes fixed on the door. Even during training, he showed no interest in exercises he had once excelled at. Soon, Rex's behavior became so erratic that the officers declared him unfit for duty. Some suggested transferring him to a training center for reconditioning or retiring him altogether. But when Grayson Hayes learned of the situation, he immediately offered to adopt Rex. Grayson visited the facility one late afternoon. When he entered, Rex lay still, unresponsive. He crouched down, gently resting his hand on the dog's head. "You remember Harper, don't you?" he asked softly. Rex whimpered before bolting toward the door, scratching at it as if desperate to escape. A nearby trainer explained that this had been Rex's behavior ever since Harper's departure. Grayson knew something was off. Rex's reaction wasn't just longing for his owner. It was as though the dog was waiting for her to return, as if expecting her to walk back into his life. Despite Grayson's best efforts to help Rex adjust to his new life, the dog refused to adapt. He wouldn't eat and seemed distant, as if stuck in some unspoken grief. It wasn't until one night when Rex suddenly began growling in the dark that Grayson realized the situation was far more complex than he had thought. Waking to the deep growl of Rex, Grayson grabbed his gun, preparing for whatever threat might lie outside. Rex stood in the living room, completely still, his body coiled with tension, his eyes locked on the door. Grayson cautiously approached the window, pulling back the curtain, but saw nothing unusual outside. Yet Rex remained vigilant, his stance unwavering. Grayson, sensing that something was wrong, clipped a leash onto Rex's collar. As soon as the leash clicked, Rex jumped to his feet, no longer sluggish. He tugged at the leash toward the door, his urgency unmistakable. As they walked through the streets, Grayson noticed that Rex wasn't just wandering. He was leading him. When they reached a narrow alley near the crime scene where Brandon Miller had been killed, Grayson froze. This was no coincidence. Rex had brought him here, and something felt off. Rex barked softly, as if confirming the discovery. Grayson's mind raced as he pieced it together. Donovan wasn't just a businessman. He had ties to Brandon Miller and had done business with shady organizations. But the symbol wasn't just a sign of the killer. It was a signal of something much bigger. Grayson opened his laptop and searched for any connections to this strange symbol, but he found nothing. Frustrated, he realized that someone had deliberately kept this from public knowledge. Then it hit him. What if the symbol wasn't just from a criminal organization, but something even more dangerous, something hidden, operating in the shadows? He quickly contacted Ethan Carter, an investigative journalist who specialized in digging up secrets the police couldn't uncover. When Grayson met with Ethan, the journalist confirmed his suspicions. Brandon Miller and Harvey Donovan had connections to Black Widow, a deadly assassin organization. They weren't random victims, they were marked targets, and the murders were part of a larger plan. The symbol, Grayson realized, wasn't just a signature. It was Black Widow's mark, their way of sending a message. Ethan showed Grayson photos from similar assassinations, each marked with the same symbol. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but a terrifying thought took hold of Grayson's mind. What if there was someone within the police force working for Black Widow? And what if Harper's case was all part of their twisted scheme? The situation grew more dangerous by the day. Grayson's investigation was becoming too risky, and he received a warning letter in the mail. Stop now while you still can. If not, your dog will be the first to die. Grayson's thoughts raced as he glanced at Rex, who lay at his feet, still loyal, still waiting for Harper. The message was clear. Whoever was behind this knew exactly where his investigation was headed and was willing to do anything to stop it. Then, news arrived from the prison. Harper's execution date had been moved up. There would be no appeals, no time for justice. In just 10 days, she would be dead. Grayson knew he had to act fast, but the deeper he went, the more it felt like the walls were closing in on him. The case was spiraling out of control, and Grayson was running out of time. The black leather glove lay before Grayson, dusted with dark, dried blood. As he picked it up, a rush of recognition coursed through him. The blood on the glove wasn't unfamiliar. It was a key piece of evidence that had been hidden deliberately, hidden from the case files. His heart raced as the realization hit. If this glove had been overlooked, it could change everything. It could unravel the entire case, clearing Harper's name. He quickly bagged it, his eyes never straying from Rex, who remained motionless beside him, his gaze intense, locked onto the shadows as if waiting for something to emerge. Forensic tests later confirmed that the blood didn't belong to Harper, but the identity of the DNA sample stunned Grayson. The name on the lab results flashed on the screen: Jonas Cade. A professional hitman, once wanted for a series of high-profile assassinations. But it was what followed next that rattled him. Cade's name was tied to an organization Grayson had heard whispers of before: Black Widow. The impact of this revelation slammed into Grayson, as if the floor had dropped from beneath him. If the blood belonged to Cade, it meant he had been at the scene of Brandon Miller's murder. And if Cade was the killer, then Harper had been set up. This was no accident. Grayson quickly gathered the results and left the lab. He needed to get the evidence to Detective Michael Harrington, the man overseeing Harper's case. If this was all part of a conspiracy to frame her, the police needed to know. He couldn't do it alone. Harrington sat in his office, the soft yellow light casting shadows on the tidy desk. He took the file from Grayson, quickly flipping through the pages. "Are you sure about these results?" Harrington's voice remained neutral, betraying no hint of surprise or emotion. "I never bring unverified evidence to you," Grayson answered firmly. "If Cade was there, Harper's been framed." Harrington leaned back, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Do you have any idea what you're getting involved in, Hayes?" Grayson met his gaze. I know exactly what I'm up against, and I know someone's hiding the truth. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the soft ticking of a clock. Then, unexpectedly, Harrington closed the file and set it aside. I'll look into it. No promises, no assurances. The way he said it made Grayson uneasy, but he had no choice but to leave. He hoped the evidence had been handed off to the right people. What Grayson didn't know was that as soon as he left, Harrington pulled out a lighter and set the file on fire. The flames spread, consuming the evidence, turning the truth Grayson had worked so hard to uncover into ash. What Grayson didn't know was that as soon as he left, Harrington pulled out a lighter and set the file on fire. The flames spread, consuming the evidence, turning the truth Grayson had worked so hard to uncover into ash. Harrington was the one pulling the strings in this dark city. He had connections to the underworld, offshore accounts, ties to shady politicians and businessmen. All evidence pointed to him being a loyal servant of Black Widow, the shadowy assassination organization. Harrington wasn't just covering up a murder, he was manipulating the entire case, turning Harper into a scapegoat to protect Black Widow's darkest secrets. People like Brandon Miller and Harvey Donovan weren't random victims. They were eliminated for being connected to Black Widow. And now, Grayson's investigation was threatening to expose everything. As Grayson walked down the street, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, a cold breeze swept past. He couldn't shake the weight pressing on his chest. He'd handed over the evidence, but it was more than just that. It was a test. If Harrington was the honest cop he claimed to be, he'd help clear Harper's name. But if he was the one pulling the strings, the evidence would be destroyed. Rex walked closely beside Grayson, his body calm but alert. The dog's sharp eyes scanned their surroundings, and Grayson trusted Rex's instincts. They had led him before. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Ethan. "What the hell are you doing? You've just put yourself in the crosshairs." Ethan's voice was frantic. Grayson glanced at the screen, typing a quick response. I need to know if he's the inside man. Before he could even put the phone down, it rang again. Ethan's voice was urgent, full of panic. "Do you realize what you've done? If Harrington's the inside man, he's not going to let you leave in one piece." "I know," Grayson replied briefly. "You know? And you still did it?" Ethan's tone turned sharp. "This isn't a game anymore. Black Widow kills anyone who stands in their way. If Harrington's part of them, how much time do you think you have left?" Grayson fell silent. Rex's gaze remained fixed on a car parked nearby, its windows tinted, but Grayson could feel the chill creep up his spine. Without saying another word, he tightened Rex's leash and headed toward an alley. If someone was watching, he wasn't about to give them the chance to act first. Back in Harrington's office, the flames consumed the file. Harrington, calm as ever, watched the truth burn away. His phone vibrated, an unknown number flashing on the screen. He picked it up. "He's suspicious," the voice on the other end whispered. "I know," Harrington replied coolly. "But it no longer matters." A brief pause. Then the voice asked, "So what's the next step?" Harrington stared at the ashes on his desk, his expression cold. "Eliminate him." Grayson, meanwhile, drove cautiously along an empty road, his hands gripping the wheel. Since adopting Rex, he'd grown used to the feeling of being followed, but tonight the unease was stronger than ever. The stakes had changed. The evidence they'd uncovered wasn't just a clue. It was a direct challenge to Black Widow. They weren't just assassins. They had the power to destroy anyone who got in their way. Rex sat beside Grayson, as alert as ever. Then, a strange noise broke the silence. A black SUV speeding toward them. Grayson's instincts kicked in as the window of the SUV slid down, revealing a gun barrel. "Shit!" Grayson muttered, slamming on the gas, but it was too late. Bullets tore through the air, shattering the rear window. Rex immediately ducked, but his sharp eyes never left the SUV. Grayson swerved the car into a narrow alley, trying to shake the pursuers, but they followed close behind, firing again. The pressure was mounting. Grayson knew he couldn't outrun them forever, but before he could react, Rex leapt onto the passenger seat, lunging toward the steering wheel. Understanding the dog's intent, Grayson jerked the wheel, slamming the SUV into the shoulder of the road. But Rex wasn't done. He leapt at the SUV's window, growling fiercely. The driver hesitated, just long enough for Grayson to make his move. He slammed the brakes, swerving into an even narrower alley. A bullet grazed Rex's back in the process, but the dog didn't falter. "Rex!" Grayson shouted as the dog swayed from the pain, but stayed determined. There was no time to check the wound. Grayson was focused on getting out. Finally, he turned off the headlights, driving the car into an abandoned lot where they lay hidden in the shadows. The SUV sped past without noticing them. After the danger passed, Grayson looked back at Rex, who was panting but still alert. A streak of blood ran down his front leg, but the wound wasn't deep. "Well done, old friend," Grayson whispered, gently placing his hand on Rex's head. "Well done, old friend," Grayson whispered, gently placing his hand on Rex's head. Rex looked up at him, calm and resolute, as if telling him not to worry. Grayson's heart swelled with respect. Despite the pain, despite the danger, Rex wouldn't give up. Neither would he. They were far from finished. Minutes later, Grayson rushed to a nearby vet clinic, where Dr. Lisa, a trusted former police officer, immediately took charge of Rex's care. After a quick check, she confirmed that the bullet had grazed Rex's shoulder, but didn't hit bone. He would need stitches, but he was strong. "I know," Grayson muttered, his voice thick with worry. Lisa finished the procedure and looked up at him. "He's tough, but he'll need time to heal. No heavy movement for a week." Grayson stayed by Rex's side, his hand gently stroking the dog's head. Rex remained calm, trusting Grayson to keep him safe. Grayson sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the bond they shared, on how, even in the face of everything that had happened, Rex kept going. And so would he. "Thanks, Lisa," Grayson said quietly as he prepared to leave. Rex, though injured, was ready to continue the mission. Harper's fate depended on them, and Grayson wouldn't rest until the truth was exposed. Grayson stared at the forensic report before him, the weight of the new evidence heavy on his mind. He hadn't shared everything. While Harrington believed he had covered his tracks, Grayson had carefully cut a small piece from the blood-stained glove and sent it to an independent lab. The results came back confirming his worst fears. The blood on it belonged to a fugitive murderer, someone directly linked to Black Widow. This wasn't just a critical piece of evidence. It was the missing link that could expose the entire system behind the frame job, proving Harper's innocence. A deep breath escaped Grayson as his fist tightened around the report, his knuckles turning white. "Harrington thinks he's wiped away all the traces," he muttered, his gaze flicking to Rex, who lay calmly beside him. The dog's sharp eyes remained alert, as always, watching every movement with unwavering focus. Grayson knew that without Rex, they would have been eliminated long ago. From pulling him into the alley where they'd discovered the mask fragment to Rex saving him from pursuers, the dog had been his protector. Rex wasn't just a working dog. He was a teammate. Ethan watched Grayson, his face tense with uncertainty. "What are you going to do?" Grayson didn't answer immediately. He turned toward Rex, the dog's presence a constant reassurance in this chaotic world. The plan was already forming in his mind. "We won't confront Vaughn directly," he said finally, standing up, the resolve in his voice firm. "He's too smart for that. But Harrington is a pawn. He doesn't know he's been exposed. If we corner him, he'll make a mistake." Grayson walked out of his makeshift office, feeling the weight of everything on his shoulders. He and Rex had been chasing fragments of the truth for days, following each lead, but nothing had come together yet. The forces behind this case were too powerful, and time was running out. With each passing minute, Harper's execution loomed closer. Then a shock hit him, like thunder on a clear day. Another assassination, this time a prominent political figure, a senator who had been leading anti-corruption investigations. What stunned Grayson, however, was the fact that all the evidence pointed directly to him. Security footage showed him near the crime scene, his fingerprints on the murder weapon, and a witness claimed to have seen him leaving the area right after the murder. It mirrored everything that had happened to Harper. This was no longer just a simple frame-up. It was a coordinated attack, and someone was pulling the strings. When the police stormed his residence, Grayson had no choice but to run. He bolted through the back door with Rex at his side, the dog's instincts on full alert. Police vehicles blocked the road ahead, their headlights sweeping over the street corner as armed agents flooded the area. Without hesitation, Grayson whistled sharply, a signal he and Rex had used for years in dangerous situations. The dog sprang into action, darting toward a low wall. Grayson followed suit, climbing over the wall with practiced ease, landing on the other side to find Rex already waiting for him. Together, they dashed into a dark alley, the sound of police footsteps close behind. Running through the city wasn't easy with the entire police force on their tail, but Grayson knew he had an advantage. Rex. The dog's survival instincts were far sharper than any human's, sensing danger long before it arrived. As they sprinted through narrow alleys, Grayson's mind raced for a plan. He couldn't just keep running aimlessly. They needed a place to hide, a chance to turn the tables. Rex suddenly stopped, its ears perked, nose sniffing the air. Grayson whispered, "What's up, boy?" But Rex didn't respond. Instead, the dog bolted off in a different direction, and Grayson hesitated only for a moment before deciding to trust Rex's instincts. They cut through more alleys and past empty parking lots until they stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse. Rex barked softly, then scratched at the rusty metal door. Grayson cautiously pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges echoing in the dark silence inside. The air was thick with the scent of engine oil, burning plastic, and chemicals. Dim light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, revealing a sprawling array of equipment in the large room. But what froze Grayson in his tracks was the sight on the metal table. A row of high-tech machinery and biological masks, each one crafted with perfect precision. Grayson stepped closer, his eyes scanning the lifelike masks. His heart skipped a beat when he saw one with his own face recreated on it. He didn't need any more proof. He knew exactly what this was. This was how Black Widow had framed Harper. And now they were using the same trick to trap him. Someone had impersonated him using this biological mask and committed the murder. Rex suddenly growled, making Grayson jump. The dog's eyes were fixed on a dark corner of the warehouse, and a faint sound, almost imperceptible, reached Grayson's ears. A footstep, barely detectable. Grayson held his breath, drawing his gun from his hip. "Come out, or I'll shoot," he called into the darkness. The shadow in the corner didn't respond, but then, without warning, a figure moved swiftly through a gap in the metal cabinet. Grayson fired a warning shot, the bullet slamming into the wall inches from the figure, forcing him to freeze. The man raised his hands slowly, turning to face Grayson. He was wearing a hoodie, his face partially obscured in the dim light. Grayson didn't recognize him, but the man knew exactly who Grayson was. A smirk crossed his face as he mocked, "You shouldn't have come here, Hayes." Before Grayson could react, the man tossed a smoke grenade onto the floor. White smoke billowed up, engulfing the room. In the chaos, the man made his escape. Rex barked furiously, but Grayson held him back. The figure was gone, but the evidence was still there. The biological masks, the proof that Grayson had been framed. He looked down at Rex, still growling, and knelt to pat him on the head. "You saved me again, old friend," Grayson murmured. "But this isn't over. If they've gone so far as to create these masks to set me up, then they're planning something even worse." The door to the warehouse creaked shut behind them, and Grayson felt the weight of what was to come. The battle wasn't over yet, but at least this time, he wasn't alone. Rex had led him here, and Grayson had no doubt the dog would lead him to the final truth. Meanwhile, within the prison walls, Harper Calloway faced a battle of her own. The darkness of her cell seemed to close in around her, the air thick with the smell of rust and sweat. She couldn't remember how many days had passed since she was brought here. Time in prison felt like it had no meaning, only restless nights filled with nightmares and endless hours of captivity. Harper wasn't afraid of death, but what terrified her more than anything was the injustice she faced. She had dedicated her life to the law, fought for justice. But now, the system had turned its back on her. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't asked to play, with a death sentence hanging over her head. But despite everything, Harper couldn't forget about Rex. She closed her eyes, remembering the image of him being dragged from the courtroom, his barking echoing in the air. He wouldn't accept the sentence. Neither would she. Her mind raced with thoughts of Rex. Was he being cared for? Had they locked him away, too? The thought made her sick. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was her companion, her partner in every sense. She remembered the early days of training him, how proud he was when he passed his first test. Rex had been her protector, and now she feared for him more than ever. As she lay in her cell, staring up at the cracked ceiling, the door suddenly opened. The guard pushed a food tray through the small gap in the bars. Harper didn't feel hungry, but she took the tray anyway. As she picked up the spoon to eat, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Not eating?" It was Martha, the woman in the bed next to hers. Harper shrugged and set the spoon down. "Not hungry?" Martha, without a word, grabbed the tray from Harper's hands, drinking the soup greedily. Harper watched, unbothered, but within minutes, Martha began coughing. At first it was light, but then it became violent, her body racked with spasms. Within moments, she collapsed, her body convulsing and frothing at the mouth. Harper's heart raced as she rushed to her side. "Martha!" She shook the woman, but she didn't respond. The guard rushed in, checking Martha's pulse, then glaring at Harper with suspicion. "What's going on here?" Harper's mind raced. She didn't need to ask who was responsible. Someone had tried to kill her, and it wasn't an accident. As the medical team took Martha's lifeless body away, Harper realized that her fear wasn't just about her own death. It was about Rex. They would stop at nothing to silence her. If they wanted her dead, they'd go after him too. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. Number. They wouldn't get the chance. She wasn't going to let them win. "I won't let them win," Harper whispered to herself. Outside, a storm was brewing, but inside Harper's heart, the fire to fight had been reignited, and quickly checked the guards for any weapons or comms equipment, ensuring they were fully incapacitated. He gave Ethan a brief nod. The area was silent now, save for the distant sounds of the night and the occasional rustle of the wind against the warehouses. They had moved quickly and efficiently, but the tension still hung thick in the air. Grayson turned to Rex, who was already standing, alert, his eyes trained on the warehouse door ahead. The dog was breathing steadily, his chest rising and falling as if nothing had happened, as if this was just another day on the job. Grayson smiled grimly, his respect for the K9 deepening by the second. Rex had always been more than just a dog to him. He was family. And tonight, Rex's sharp instincts were their only true guide. "Let's move," Grayson whispered, his voice barely audible. Ethan didn't need any more prompting. The trio, Grayson, Ethan, and Rex, moved like shadows, gliding across the darkened grounds toward the entrance of the warehouse. The building loomed ahead, an intimidating structure, but Grayson felt a surge of determination. This was it. They were closing in on Harper, and the stakes had never been higher. As they approached the entrance, Grayson signaled for Ethan to stay low, and Rex naturally fell into his usual position ahead of them, sniffing the air and checking for any signs of movement. The door to the warehouse was slightly ajar. Grayson crept forward, his knife still in hand, his senses heightened. Every step was measured, every sound scrutinized. They couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and oil, the dim lighting barely illuminating the room. The shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, and Grayson could make out the shape of old, rusted machinery scattered about. He held his breath as he moved further into the warehouse. Suddenly, a low growl from Rex broke the silence, a warning shot through the tension. Grayson's heart skipped a beat, but before he could react, the growl morphed into a sharp bark, a call to action. Rex surged forward, his eyes locking onto a figure standing in the far corner of the room. Grayson motioned for Ethan to follow, and they both moved swiftly, covering the ground with the practiced efficiency of men who had been in far too many dangerous situations. Rex was already ahead, his ears flat against his head as he zeroed in on the man. "Stop right there," Grayson barked, his voice cutting through the tension. The figure, clearly startled, froze for a moment, his hands rising slowly. It was Vaughn, the man responsible for everything, the one who had orchestrated Harper's downfall. Grayson's anger boiled over, but he knew there was no time for that now. Vaughn wasn't alone. Harper was somewhere in the warehouse, and Grayson needed to move fast. Vaughn smirked as if amused by their sudden appearance. "You really think you can stop me, Hayes?" His voice was thick with arrogance, the calmness in his tone only making Grayson's blood boil more. "You've already lost," Grayson said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "The game's up, Vaughn. You're not getting away with this." Before Vaughn could retort, Rex lunged, his teeth snapping inches from the man's face. Vaughn stepped back quickly, clearly unnerved by the dog's speed and precision. "Get that dog off me!" Vaughn yelled, his voice trembling for the first time. But Rex didn't stop. He was ready to tear into him, to hold Vaughn in place, to make him pay for everything he had done. The dog's growl was low and menacing, his body taut with readiness, a clear sign that he wasn't going to let Vaughn escape. Grayson motioned for Ethan to check the perimeter, and as Ethan moved out of sight, Grayson slowly advanced on Vaughn, the knife still in his hand. "You thought you could bury the truth. You thought you could bury Harper," Grayson said, his voice dark and steady. Vaughn's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he quickly regained his composure. "I've buried more than just her," he hissed, his eyes cold. "This entire city is under my control." Grayson didn't flinch. "Not anymore." Just as Grayson took another step forward, Rex's bark cut through the air, signaling that there was someone else in the room. A faint movement caught Grayson's eye, and he turned just in time to see another guard rushing toward them from behind a stack of crates. "Grayson, move!" Ethan shouted, his gun drawn. Before the guard could reach them, Rex bolted forward, faster than Grayson could react. The dog lunged, knocking the guard off balance and sending him sprawling to the floor. It was over in seconds. Rex's teeth sank into the man's arm, and Grayson was right behind, delivering a swift blow to the guard's head that knocked him unconscious. With the guard down, Grayson looked back to Vaughn, who had backed up a few steps, his eyes wild with fear. "You don't have control anymore," Grayson growled. "Get them!" Vaughn shouted, but his command came too late. The remaining guards in the warehouse, startled by the sudden attack, hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Grayson seized the moment. Get Harper, now, he ordered. Rex, already on his feet, growled low and dashed forward, moving with precision as he sniffed the air. Within moments, the dog had located Harper, locked away in the far corner of the warehouse, where she had been tied to a chair. Her face was pale, but her eyes locked onto Rex, a flicker of hope crossing her features. Grayson's heart pounded as he rushed to her side, cutting the ropes that bound her. "We're getting you out of here," he said, his voice low but full of determination. Harper looked at him, her face softening despite the pain she had endured. "I knew you'd come." "You're not alone," Grayson replied, glancing back to make sure they weren't being followed. "Let's go." With Rex leading the way, the trio made their way through the abandoned warehouse, escaping the chaos they had left behind. Grayson knew that this wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a crucial victory. The truth was coming to light, and they would stop at nothing to make sure justice was served. But as they reached the exit, Grayson couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being hunted, and the battle was far from over. So hard to bring about, Harper's freedom, the redemption of her name, and the steadfast loyalty of a dog that had never wavered. It was a moment of calm in the chaos they had endured. Harper and Rex, bound by more than just training, bound by trust, loyalty, and the deep, unspoken connection that only the two of them shared. It was a bond, forged in the heat of battle and solidified through shared pain and triumph. Grayson allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection, but he knew this wasn't the end. The victory they had achieved was monumental, but it was still just one battle in a much larger war. Black Widow had taken a blow, but the organization's reach was vast, and they were far from finished. The world might have been watching, but there were still secrets to uncover. More corrupt officials to expose, and more lives to save. Harper's voice brought him back to the present as she softly whispered, "Sorry for making you worry." Grayson glanced at her, seeing the weariness in her eyes and the weight of everything she had carried alone for so long. But there was a quiet strength in her still, an unbreakable will that refused to be extinguished, no matter how harsh the world had been. "You don't need to apologize," he said quietly. "You've never needed to apologize to me." Harper looked up at him, her expression softening, grateful for the unspoken support he offered. She understood. She had never truly been alone, not as long as Grayson was by her side, and certainly not with Rex. They were her family, and she was theirs. Rex, as if understanding the exchange, let out a low whine, nudging closer to Harper. She stroked his fur, feeling the warmth of his body, his steady heartbeat, and his unshakable devotion. In that moment, she knew that despite everything, she had something no one could take away. Her bond with Rex and the unwavering loyalty of the dog who had fought for her when no one else would. "We've made it this far," Grayson said, his voice steady. "But we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover. Black Widow isn't finished, and neither are we." Harper nodded, her resolve returning. She could feel it in her bones. The fight wasn't over, and as long as she had Rex, she wouldn't give up. She could sense the determination in Grayson as well. Together they would tear down the shadows that had tried to bury the truth, piece by piece. "We will," Harper replied softly, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We'll finish this together." And as Rex nudged her hand, giving one final tired wag of his tail, Harper knew that this time she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the truth, for justice, and for the unbreakable bond she shared with the one being who had never let her down. Grayson watched them quietly, his heart swelling with pride for the woman and the dog who had endured so much and still had the strength to keep going. Together, they were unstoppable. "Let's go," Grayson said as he walked toward the door, and with that they left the room, moving forward into the unknown, knowing that the road ahead would be just as difficult as the one they had already traveled. But as long as they had each other, they would fight on. The bond between Harper Calloway and Rex was something beyond words, forged in the crucible of danger, loyalty, and unwavering trust. Through the darkest of times, Rex had been her protector, her steadfast partner who never wavered, even when the world turned against her. Their story wasn't just one of justice, but of resilience, a reminder that the most powerful force in the fight for truth and fairness isn't always the strongest weapon or the sharpest mind. Sometimes it's simply the loyalty of a dog willing to give everything for its handler. After the final victory in the courtroom, when the system that had tried to bury Harper was torn apart, the sun shone brighter for her than it had in months. She could finally breathe freely, standing side by side with Grayson and Rex, knowing that their fight had made the world a safer place. It wasn't over yet, but they had proven that even in a world where justice was often manipulated, loyalty, courage, and truth would always find a way to shine through. As Harper stood among the crowd, the ceremony honoring Rex brought with it the recognition he deserved. His bravery, his intelligence, and his bond with Harper were now celebrated for all to see. He was no longer just a working dog. He was a hero. Rex's eyes gleamed with pride as Harper bent down to place the medal around his neck. The applause was deafening, a fitting tribute to a creature who had sacrificed so much and given everything to protect his partner. In that moment, Harper knew that they had not only exposed the darkness, but had also brought light back into their world, light that would guide them in their future fight for justice. As the ceremony concluded, Harper and Grayson exchanged a silent glance. They had faced the worst together, and now, as they looked toward the future, they knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as a team. Together, with Rex by their side. The sky that day was clear, the sun casting its warm rays over the city square where the ceremony took place. It was a new beginning, not just for Harper, but for the world of law enforcement, now free of the dark influence that had threatened to corrupt it. With the light of truth now shining brightly, the journey of Harper Calloway and Rex would continue as they fought for justice, side by side. Their story had become a symbol of unwavering loyalty and the unbreakable bond that could never be torn apart. As long as they had each other, they would never stop fighting for what was right. And in a world where truth could be twisted, their loyalty would remain the guiding light that exposed the darkness and brought justice back into the light. If you enjoyed their story, stay tuned for more incredible tales of loyalty, courage, and justice. You won't want to miss the next chapter in their journey.